only one out of every 20 properties is the owner going to say, yeah, I'm thinking about selling. You have to anticipate that level of success. So
Is very important to you and understanding your market, understanding your numbers.
real estate is such a stats oriented thing. And, as a real estate broker, but if you can quantify what your market is and talk with statistics, then you are able to do a couple of different things. Number one, the real estate business is not really the real estate business. And this is the way I explain to people who don't understand the real estate business and are not in the real estate business. I see in the very best brokers anywhere in the country is number one.
All right, Phone Warriors Nation, we have a wonderful guest with us today. Very special indeed. He's one of the top brokers or commercial real estate agents in New York City of all time. Actually, we're talking of all time. One of the OGs, as we say, the legends. Bob Knakal himself has graciously come on the Phone Warriors podcast. Bob, welcome to the Phone Warriors Nation.
Guys, so great to be with you. And first of all, I got to tell you, I love the name of the organization, Phone Warriors. Wish I had thought of it. That's a great one. And it's so apropos for a prospecting initiative, no doubt about it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And we're going to cover a lot today, and we're going to deliver as much value as we possibly can. But I'm actually going to start with a little bit different than I normally do, with one of your tweets that you had put out there last year in April of 2023, verbatim, because I think this is the best way to start for a Phone Warriors podcast, what this tweet was. And so it goes, when I am cold calling and I get hung up on, what is the first thing that I do? Call right back and say, I think we were disconnected. Half the time, the recipient of the call is so embarrassed they hung up on you, right? They were actually engaged in the conversation. The other half of the time, they just start to hang up again. And then what do? You move on. So what did that, when you said that, public, like what did you mean by that?
I meant exactly what I said. I think that, if you think about it from property owners' perspectives, they're probably getting called a lot of times by a lot of people. Today, especially publicly available information is so readily available. You go online, you get somebody's home number, you get their cell phone number, you get their shoe size, you can get anything about somebody. So, people who own property probably getting inundated by calls from folks. And the instinct is, oh, let me just hang up, and they hang up and don't expect the person to call back again. And I don't know why I did it, but one time after I got hung up on, I just called right back and I just said, hey, we must have been disconnected. And I think the owner I was talking to must have felt so embarrassed that he hung up on me that we actually ended up having a pretty good conversation. So I said, wow, that worked great. So I'm going to do that from now on. And I will tell you that literally half the time when you get hung up on, I call right back. And half the time somebody will talk to me. The other half of the time, they just slam the phone down again. But then you'll call them again in 2 or 3 months when you get back around to them. But that is a technique that has actually worked really well for me. And I think that getting hung up on it never really bothered me that much. And I think it's important because that kind of thing happens a lot in our industry. But I think understanding the probability of success is something that makes it okay. So, I sell buildings primarily in Manhattan, and in Manhattan, south of 96th Street, which is the prime part of Manhattan, there are 27,649 buildings. The average turnover rate of that stock is about 2.6% in the average year, and that's been the case for 40 years. And about half the stuff that goes on the market actually will trade. So that's telling you that only one out of every 20 properties is the owner going to say, yeah, I'm thinking about selling. So if you go into a calling program and you know that the probability is 19 out of 20 people are going to either say no to you or hang up on you, you have to anticipate that level of success. So if I'm making my calls and I get hung up on 19 times in a row, I feel awesome because the probability the next one is going to be a yes is very, very high. So I think it's important to have the right perspective when you're making these calls.
Wow. So KPI is very important to you, and understanding your market, understanding your numbers, the absorption rate, which is what you're talking about. So what made you take that approach to take the numbers perspective?
You know what? I have always been a statistics guy, Richard. I really, as a kid, I played baseball, played Little League baseball, always kept track of my stats, collected baseball cards as a young kid, and I was one of the kids who spent more time looking at the back of the card than the front of the card, and just loved stats. And real estate is such a stats-oriented thing, and as a real estate broker, the most frequently asked question you're going to get is, "Hey, how's the market?" Right? Someone owns a property. They want to know how their investment is doing. How's the market going? And 99% of agents will answer that question with adjectives. My 15-year-old daughter, who doesn't know anything about the real estate market, could answer that question with adjectives and probably be fairly accurate, right? But but if you can quantify what your market is and talk with statistics, then you are able to do a couple of different things. Number one, you show that you know the market, right? I quoted some stats about the Manhattan market and the turnover rate. So you guys say, wow, this guy knows what's happening in Manhattan. But think about it, for the agent who's selling homes in the a southwest corner of Idaho, and says, hey, in this part of the state, or this part of the city, or this geographic area that I cover, there are 2,417 houses. And over the past 3 years, the average turnover has been X%. And this year, the turnover is up by 14%. And, if you start talking that way, immediately the owner says, wow, this person really understands the market, and they will believe you're a market expert, whether you do or don't. And I tell young people all the time, I said, look, you feel like you're at a disadvantage because you've only been in the business a year, 3 years. You have relatively little experience, and you're competing against people who have 20 years of experience or 30 years of experience. And you're like, how can I compete with them? Well, you know what? You can easily compete with them, because I'm telling you, if you pick a geographic region and you talk about how many properties there are in that area, I will guarantee you that the person with 20 or 30 years of experience does not know how many homes or properties are in that geographic boundary. And so immediately you're setting yourself apart, you're differentiating yourself. And everything in our business, I think it's so important to know that the real estate business is not really the real estate business. It's the information and relationship business. And if you create quality proprietary information about your market, that enables you to differentiate yourself from everybody else that's trying to do what you do. And to the extent you differentiate yourself, that's creating a competitive advantage. And that's what we're all looking for, a competitive advantage. How are we going to get an advantage over the other guy or gal that's trying to do exactly what I'm doing?
Right. And then, so that's a great point. And Bob, one thing that stands out to me is that one of the pillars of, if I can go back to the old, Bob Knakal days of Massey Knakal, right? Because I mean, you were considered, I would say, like the top 5 commercial brokerages, if not, just in New York City, but we're talking the country, or maybe, you mean that there was like a top 5 or 6 that I remember. And so you were right up there. Is that what propelled you guys, you think? I mean, how do you you led your brokerage in that way with having a numbers focus? Is that more or less how that, transpired?
Yeah, well, Dean, I don't want this to come off as bragging, but just to put it in perspective.
Not bragging if you do it.
Good, good, thanks. The CoStar Group started tracking the investment sales market in New York in 2001. From 2001 to 2014, when we sold the business, the number 2 sales company in New York had sold about 1,300 properties. Massey Knakal sold over 4,000. We lapped the field. We were competing against the big regional companies, the national companies, the global companies, and we were eating their lunch. 3x, more than 3x what the closest competitor was doing. And it was all because of this focus on information and differentiating ourselves and getting to know the areas. We set up the company with a geographic territory system, very similar to what in residential you'd call farming.
Yep.
We put lines on a map. You were responsible for that box and call every owner in that area, get to know every sale that happened over the last 3 years, know every buyer, every seller, who owns the most buildings, who owns the most square footage, what new developments are going on in the area, what zoning changes may affect value of properties in the area, all that kind of stuff. And it was that granular information that enabled us to differentiate ourselves, and that was a competitive advantage. So even when we had started out, we had sold 3 buildings and we were competing for a 4th. And, the owner said to us, well, I'm talking to these other firms that have been around for decades. And we said, yeah, you're right. You're right. But we've only sold 3 buildings, but one was down the block, one was across the street, and one was right next door to you. And we know more about this neighborhood than anybody else. And so we can be a better advocate to convince buyers why they should pay more for your property. And you know what? We got that listing. That resonated with people. And we just did that over and over and over again.
So farming, so if you're just cold calling, this geographic area to learn about the businesses, learn about the owners, are you following up with these people at a later date as well and saying, hey, we spoke X, Y, Z, and are you cultivating relationships, or is this kind of like a one-off when you're speaking to them?
Richard, I'll explain. And this is the way I explain to people who don't understand the real estate business and are not in the real estate business. Let's say the 3 of us were going to go to Iceland and sell rocks for a living.
Okay.
What would we do? We would go and we would make up a list of everybody that owns rocks. We'd make up a list of everybody that buys rocks. We'd study the rock market and figure out how many of each type of rock there was, what rocks sell for more money, which rock sells for less money. And then we would go on a campaign of contacting repetitively the folks who own the rocks to get them to hire us. And once we establish credibility with them, develop relationships with them, get hired to sell their rocks, then we'd call the people that buy rocks. That's the brokerage business. The brokerage business is very, very simple, but it's very hard. And so the reason that we set up these territories is because you don't just make a call once and then not follow up. You are going to call each prospect. And we always thought that the best size for a marketplace was about 1,000 to 1,200 owners, individual owners, because that's a group of folks that you can call once a quarter. And based on the turnover ratios here, the 2.6% turnover ratio relates to someone when they buy a property in Manhattan, they'll own it for an average of 40 years. So you don't have to call them every week. But once a quarter, we thought was enough to develop a relationship with them. But what we did is we called them once a quarter. We sent them a piece of hard mail once a month. Then when email became popular, we'd send them an email once every week, every 2 weeks or every month. We'd send them text messages. You're constantly following up, trying to break folks down. And what this process is, I use the analogy of the Stonecutters Creed. Stonecutter Creed is pound the rock, pound the rock, pound the rock. And so if you think about it, the stonecutter comes into the shop, sits in front of a big piece of rock, gets the mallet out and whacks that thing, hits the rock 99 times, nothing has happened. The 100th time, boom, the rock splits in half. And to the casual observer, they'll say, oh, that 100th one must have been different. You must have used a different hammer, or you must have hit it at a different angle, or maybe you hit that one harder. And the stonecutter knows, no way, Jose. What did it is the 99 blows that came before it allowed that 100th one to work. And in the same way, you have to repetitively call people, work on developing the relationship, and continue on these things. And so much of what makes a successful broker is being able to use discipline in a way that will allow you to continue to do all these very simple and often mundane things over and over again, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. And I always say that the three characteristics that I see in the very best brokers anywhere in the country is, number one, they're an expert in something. In a very narrow sector of the market, they're an expert. They know it like the back of their hand. Number two, they have tremendous passion for the business. They love it. And you have to love it, because you know what? No matter how good you are, the market always has been, is, and always will be cyclical. You're going to have tough times. The love of the business will allow you to make it through the tough times and survive for the good times that will inevitably follow. And then that third aspect is using discipline well. And discipline will allow you to continue to make those calls when people are hanging up on you. Continue to draft content and send out email blasts and send out hard mail and go to networking events and be active on social media and do all those market presence things that you have to do to break down break down the resistance. As a saying, persistence breaks down resistance. So you have to keep at it over and over and over again. And so it's not jumping around. You're not like a butterfly going from one flower to the next and meandering all over the place.
Right.
Pick a target market and continue to keep calling them all the time. And I use as an example, there's a large owner in New York, guy named Harry Macklow. And Harry owned, when I started cold calling back in 1984, he had a little development site on East 60th Street. I called him for 2.5 years, and he never took my call. I sent him mail all the time, but always left message. And in those days, I still write everything down in calls, but in my catalog pages for him, pages of left message, left message, left message. I called his office one night at 7 o'clock, and his assistant had gone home, and he picked up the phone. And I said, "Hey, Mr. Macklow, Bob Knakal from Coldwell Banker. Would love to." "Yeah, I know who you are. You leave messages for me all the time. What do you want?" And, Harry has become one of my best clients. I've done 23 deals with him, over $400 million worth of stuff. And if after the first 10 calls or the first 20 calls, I stopped calling him, that never would have happened. So you have to just keep at it, keep pounding the rock. And ultimately you will become successful if you have the discipline to just keep at it.
All right, I think we're done with the podcast now. Thank you, Bob. That was great. I mean, seriously, we talk about this. It's so great to hear it coming from someone like your caliber, really, and what all of you've accomplished, because so many agents that reach out to us for advice, or other people and coaches and trainers, it's the same stuff. And you just said it beautifully. It's so eloquent. So everyone who's listening to this, guys, that is the business. So now you said something interesting though, right? You had this. You just kept at it with that guy, Harry, what's
Harry
his name?
Macklow, yeah.
You kept at it with Harry for, time, call after call, left message. And it's funny. You literally are saying my playbook and that I teach agents, which is so funny. Anyway, but on that note though, what do you feel like? I mean, I'm sure you've seen attrition in your business with agent counts and going down, up at different markets and everything. Commercial, I suspect, is a very advantageous, wow, you can make these big commission checks because you guys do much bigger deals traditionally. But even with that, doing the mundane, what is then Bob Knakal's burning desire? Like, what has gotten you and to keep on moving the ball forward in your business for so long? And like that deep rooted why that you have, like, it seems so connected and aligned, but what does that look like? And what can you share with other agents that are listening to this right now about that?
Yeah, well, you know what? I get asked that quite a bit, because, when we sold the business in 2014 to Cushman & Wakefield for $100 million, we had no debt on the company. It was a life-changing thing for me. And people say, "Bob, what the heck are you still doing this for?" And I have to tell you, I absolutely love this business. I think it's the greatest business in the world. And, today, when they talk about kids on their cell phones, they say, "Oh, well, kids are getting addicted because there's this dopamine rush you get from the feedback you get and everything." And I tell you, I think I'm addicted to winning. And the brokerage business provides so many opportunities to win. Think about the course of just one deal. You find out the owner wants to sell. You get the rush. because it's 1 out of 20. So yeah, you get the rush. And then you go pitch the business and you find out you won the pitch. That's a dopamine rush. And then, you're marketing the property and you get a meeting of the minds on the price and the terms. That's a rush. And then you sign the contract. That's a rush. And then you close the deal. That's a rush. So there are all these opportunities to win. And that's something that I just think is so great. And I truly just love the business. And I think that, when it comes to cold calling, and prospecting calls, and it's only cold calling for the first couple of years, because if you have a set data base of 1,200 people that you're going to be going after, your first few rounds of calls are cold, but then after a while, they all become prospecting calls, not cold calls, as people know you. But you want to call and offer them something of value. And that's where the value of proprietary information comes in, knowing your market, knowing the statistics, being able to say, hey, in the past 2 months, X number of properties have sold, and this was the average price, and that was up or down X% from what it was, year over year. Being able to do that, you're calling, giving something, sharing something of value. And share is probably the most important word in calling people. Is you want to have something of value to share with them and say, hey, I'd like to share this with you. That's a very positive word, very benign word. You're not asking them for anything. Of course, the goal of every call is, I want to meet with you and I want to know if you want to sell. But if you call up and say, hey, do you want to sell your property? Boom, you're going to get hung up on 90% of the time. So you call up and say, hey, I'm an expert selling properties like yours in the neighborhood. I just put a market report together that goes over everything you possibly could want to know about the marketplace, and I would love to share that with you. Would you like me to send it to you? And most of the time, people are going to say, yeah, send it over. And then you get in, have a conversation. How long have you owned your property? Blah, blah, blah. And then you get, oh, by the way, anything you want to sell, and then you kind of back into it. And it's a much more benign approach to finding out what you really want to find out.
Wow.
That's an interesting way to we use the word backdoor your way into a conversation. Now, one thing that I keep hearing when you're talking about these conversations and prospecting, you also have to be very strong mentally, right? So your mindset has to be in line with your goals, right? So do you have goal setting and strong, with your why, with your mindset? Like, can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what really goes on in the mindset of Bob?
Look, from 40,000 feet, I'll tell you that, a couple of weeks ago, I closed deal 2,239. Next 2 weeks, I'm closing deal 2,240. I want to get to 3,000. Right. I'm a big baseball fan. 3,000 hits is kind of a great milestone in baseball. I want to get to 3,000 sales. May take me another 10 years, but I'm going to keep grinding it out. And that's something that keeps me going. But it's looking for that thrill. It's kind of like, you're on a treasure hunt every day. You're making those calls, looking for treasure, looking for the people that want to sell, looking for that great opportunity. And I just think that if you implement these very basic fundamental things, it'll put you in a position to increase the probability of success. And, at the end of the day, making money is a great byproduct of all this stuff. And yes, we do this because we want to make money. But I think it's as the old wide world of sports intro used to say, it's the joy of victory and the agony of defeat. And that's what keeps you going.
Absolutely. And Bob, what you're saying is so true to so many different levels. I think one thing that has stood out to me just by seeing your story online and like watching you kind of go a different direction, there's always like a new improvement that you're doing. There's always something that you're doing, but you have this like playfulness about you. You know what I mean? Like you have this like it's a game. It's like, that's so cool to see. Like even at your point in your career, there's still this like passion that you have around everything that you're doing around this, which is fantastic. So speaking about improvements and everything that you're doing on that side, and we'll get into BKR, REA and what you're doing. Talk about the map. because I've been seeing this all over your social, and obviously you were, going into it like, why? My question is, why wasn't this done like years ago? And all of a sudden, what gave you the idea to implement it? And like, talk more about the map.
Yeah, well, Dean, you know what? That's a great question. And the map was the culmination of a desire that I had to understand the market better. And I will tell you that, a big part of my brokerage practice always has been development sites in New York. And New York doesn't have rolling pastures of land. Generally, you have to acquire a number of small, crummy buildings, knock them down to create a piece of land on which to build a new building. And remarkably, for a market that is so big and so sophisticated, there was really not a very robust data set of the construction pipeline in New York. And there are rental apartments, there are condos, there are office buildings, hotels, educational facilities, healthcare buildings, and virtually no information about the supply that's under construction, other than that most residential firms in New York will publish a report on the condos that are under construction. But firm A will say, oh, there's 9,000 under construction, and firm B will say there's 5,000 under construction. And then I asked them how they calculated their numbers, and they will start counting at a certain point in time. They'd stop counting at a certain point in time. If the developer bought a site, but plans hadn't been approved yet, does that count? And everyone was using different metrics. So I said, you know what? If I stand in front of a building that's being constructed, I know it's being constructed. It's not rocket science, but I just have to go out and walk the streets. And I've wanted to do this for 10 years. I wanted to know what the pipeline was, because when you're looking at the value of a piece of land, the value is very dependent upon what is that building going to be competing with when it gets built. What other newer properties have been built? So you need to know what else is in the pipeline. So for 10 years, I wanted to get out and actually do a physical count of the buildings. Well, who has time to do that? So, so
Delegation.
yeah, March 12th, we're told go home for 2 weeks while we let this pandemic blow over, and then you come back. And my doctor actually called me that night and said, "Hey, Bob, there's a rumor going around that they may just quarantine the entire city, entire Manhattan. They're going to shut the bridges and tunnels. Get out of town while you can." So I got in the car with my wife and daughter, go up to the country house in Connecticut, and we left in kind of a rush. And 2 weeks later, it was clear that we weren't going to be back in the office. So I said, "Hey, I've got to go back to the apartment and get some stuff." And so I pull off the FDR Drive, pull onto the Upper East Side, and it was like going into a movie set of a science fiction movie. There was not a person around. Every store was closed, no cars on the street. It literally was like a movie set. And it occurred to me, hey, you know what? If I'm ever going to go count buildings, this is the time to do it. So
Wow.
I called up my team. I said, hey, get into the office, make copies of the Sanborn tax lot map. And I had sections of this map. And over the next 4 months, I spent 220 hours in the field, and would get in the car, stop at point A, get out, walk around for a half hour, get in the car, go to point B, get out, walk around for a half hour. And I had highlighters, and I highlighted every building that was under construction or a site had been demolished. Highlighted that in green. Any building that looked like it was built to less than 25% of its maximum density, I highlighted in orange. Potential assemblage sites, I highlighted in yellow. And then we got back to the office, started doing research on all these sites, started taping pieces of the map together to see what was happening in a neighborhood. Before I know it, I had a map that was 24 feet long and 10 feet wide. We had identified every single property that was under construction. Subsequent to doing that field work, which finished up at the end of the summer of 2020, we've tracked every demolition permit the city has issued, every construction permit, building permit, foundation permit. And so we have the development pipeline disaggregated into 5 buckets: residential rental units, condo units, hotel, office, and then a miscellaneous bucket for everything that doesn't fit into the first 4, like school buildings and hospitals, healthcare buildings, that kind of thing. But we have the development pipeline nailed down to the square inch. So when we're looking at a development site, we can tell you with complete accuracy what the comp set is going to look like for the space or the units that new building will be competing with when it's completed. And so, I created I had this giant 24-foot long map. I'm at JLL at the time. And I went to the folks there and said, hey, I need a room to put this thing on display, because I had been rolling it up and carrying it around to clients' offices. And I got caught in the rain one day. And I'm like, hey, this is not good. And JLL, of course, didn't have space for me. If they gave me 600 feet, they'd have to give everybody 600 feet. And so I rented space, created the Knakal map room. And while I was at JLL, I would work out of the JLL offices on Monday and Friday, and I'd work out of the map room on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then after my departure from JLL, I was working in the map room 1.0 full time, and now I'm as of 2 or 3 weeks ago, in map room 2.0. So more elbow room, more space. I have about a dozen people at the company now, and we're doing the same thing I've done for 40 years, which is selling properties and focusing on land sales.
Holy cow, that's intense.
It's amazing that you didn't have like there's no technology that was out there that can have all this information that you physically had to do during COVID. Go out there and walk the streets
Right,
of
but
New
then
York City.
you also have to have methodology, right? You have to have methodology that, when do you start counting a building? Well, what we've done with the pipeline, we've separated into 3 different buckets: pending deals, active deals, and completed deals. So when a developer buys a site, or an owner submits plans to build a building, that site goes into the pending bucket. As soon as that owner gets a construction loan, that flips into the active bucket, because if you're getting a construction loan and paying interest on a construction loan, you're going to start building. And then for each individual property type, there's a different metric that will flip it from being an active deal to a completed deal. But using that same methodology, we know exactly whether a deal should be counted in which of the buckets, and the methodology is all consistent. So, looking at the numbers over time, we'll be comparing apples to apples based on that.
Wow. So no other broker, to your knowledge, has anything remotely close to you. So why would clients go to anybody else but you? You have the roadmap here.
They shouldn't, Richard. That's what I'm hoping. Look, over the course of my career, I study my activity very, very closely. And, I've worked with a broker coach, Rob Santamassimo, at the Massimo Group since 2012. And I track all my statistics. And I know over my 40-year career, my success rate on pitches has been 26%. In the Knakal map room, I'm now 18 for 18. I've not lost a pitch. And I gave 2 pitches this morning, and I'm pretty confident I'm going to get both of those. So very shortly, I could be 20 for 20 pitching business in here. But it becomes very clear that, and I don't want to sound like a jerk, but I know more about the land market than anybody else in town. In fact, we're coming out very shortly, hopefully by the end of the summer, with the Knakal Land Index, which, most people in New York will say, oh, last year land in Manhattan sold for X dollars per buildable foot. And to me, that's like saying last year the average price of a peach, a bowling ball, and a 2x4 was $11.50. So we've disaggregated all the land sales into the 5 buckets. And we're coming out with a study of 2,417 development site sales that have occurred in Manhattan, south of 96th Street, going all the way back to 1984. And we're taking those fluctuations in land value. And I have personally verified each of those sales, because we've been tracking this stuff for so long. And we're using AI models to look at the fluctuation in value and compare those fluctuations to metrics within each of the buckets. So for rental land, we're looking at how rents have fluctuated, how occupancies have fluctuated, what public policies impact supply, things like that. But we're also comparing those fluctuations in value to things like interest rates and lending rates and inflation and the S&P 500, Dow Jones Industrial Average, price of gold, price of oil, consumer sentiment, and a basket of about 30 macroeconomic factors. So we believe that we're going to be able to look at this data and have the algorithmic models spit out that, hey, when interest rates drop by 75 basis points and the price of eggs go up by 15%, the hotel land market will rally 10 months from now. And these models should be able to produce that kind of data.
That's incredible, Bob. I mean, that's like serious knowledge. I mean, and that's probably why you're at like batting 1,000 right now, from what it seems like. I mean, so congratulations on that. And that's part of your, I guess, the new brokerage that you started with this map.
Yeah, the BKREA is, we're
Yeah.
taking a lot of our old school analog stuff, and I will tell you that the Knakal map room is about as analog as it gets. We have, dozens of 3-ring binders full of information. We have the paper map, but we're layering AI on top of it. And I will tell you that what I just said about what we're doing with the land index all sounds really sophisticated and technologically savvy. And while it is, I am probably the least technologically savvy person in the world. I'm happy my cell phone goes on in the morning, but I'm a big fan of Dr. Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan's books. One of them is Who Not How. And the main thesis of that book is, when you come up with a good idea and you say to yourself, how am I going to do this? You're asking the wrong question. The question should be, who am I going to get to do this for me? So I went out and I hired a COO, Seth Samowitz, who is an AI expert. The guy worked for years in driverless cars. And I figured, hey, if he can make a car drive by itself, he can figure out how to help me sell buildings. So we're layering on all this really cool AI technology to what we're doing. So BKREA is a blend of old school analog approaches with a very highly sophisticated and proprietary AI technologies layered on top of it.
Wow. That is that's cutting edge right there. Taking the AI technology, taking your knowledge, taking the statistics, and then formulating that. Is that going to be just for your company only, or are you going to take this and you're going to package it up and let other consumers use it?
No, it's just for clients. I mean, look, everything we do, everything is about the client, right? And what we try to do, the reason why we have the proprietary data that we have, and the reason we do everything we do is to put our clients in a position to be more informed and make better decisions about what they want to do with their real estate. So it's all about the client. People have said, "Oh, Bob, you should, license that information out." I don't want to do that. I want to help clients make good decisions, and I want them to use us to make those decisions and implement the strategies that they want to implement. So, again, it's having that information is a differentiator, and we're very excited to be using all this technology at a time where, I've said that people are trying to figure AI out. And I always say, look, AI is not going to replace anybody, but somebody using AI is going to replace somebody who's not using AI. So I encourage everybody, look into it, figure out there's so many different things, tools you can use. And it's interesting too, when you talk about technology is, when I started my career in 1984, I had no cell phone, no computer on my desk, no fax machine even. And today you look at how the world has changed in 40 years. I think the rate to which, or the extent to which the world is going to change over the next 5 is going to blow the last 40 away. There are things, there are tools we're using that 2 months ago were, hey, wow, this is so cool. This is new. It's cutting edge. Look at what this can do. And that thing that only came out 2 months ago now has been replaced by something that's bigger, faster, broader, more powerful. And like the old thing that came out 2 months ago is a dinosaur already. The rate of change with what's being developed is absolutely astounding. And so I just don't want to get run over by somebody using this stuff. So I'm trying to use it before they do.
It's amazing. You know, I just want to just 2 points before I forget this, because a lot of information that you just shared right there. Number one is, I hope you guys heard what he just said very briefly, kind of like very quickly, which was you got pitched, let's say, you know, for lack of a better word, to license this whole thing that you built. And you said, no, it's for the clients. That level of focus to me is astounding. Whether you look at it like that, I heard that is that you know why you're doing this, why you're doing something, and you have this like discipline around that. So that's number one. And I don't want to breeze over something else you said. Did you say you have a coach?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I've worked. I think coaching is incredibly valuable, and I'll tell you the story. I get a call in 2011. Get a call from this guy Rod Santomassimo. He said, "Hey Bob, I'm writing a book. The book is called Brokers Who Dominate, and it's about the top commercial real estate brokers in North America. Would you be interested in being in the book?" And I'm like, who the heck wouldn't want to be in that book, right? So he's like, I've talked to a number of people and they tell me I have to get to know you and have to put you in the book. So I start having these phone sessions with Rod, talking about my background and what I do, how I do it, that kind of thing. And I get around to talking to him, and I'm like, so Rod, what do you do? You know, how many books have you written? What kind of books do you write? And he's like, oh, this is my first book. I'm not a writer at all. I'm actually a broker coach. And I'm like, a broker coach? What the heck is a broker coach? I never heard of that. And he told me he has a company that coaches brokers. And it occurred to me, I said, you know what? Michael Jordan has a coach. Tiger Woods has a coach. Olympic athletes have coaches. What the heck? Let me give it a try. And it's been a life-changing thing for me. You know, I think, as I said, one of the top three characteristics in folks is discipline. And I always say, you use discipline, you don't have discipline. Discipline is available to everybody. It's all whether you choose to use it and how you choose to use it that counts. And so working with Rod has done a couple of things for me. One is it has helped me be even more disciplined. I think I'm fairly disciplined, but you could always be more disciplined, and he helps me with that. And then also, because the Massimo Group is coaching people all over North America, you know, nobody knows everything. And if there's some kid in Kansas City that comes up with a better way to do something, I want to know about it before anybody else does. So you know, working with the Massimo Group, you know, puts me in that position. So I found it to be tremendously beneficial to have a coach.
You're
Awesome.
right, Tiger Woods. Everybody has coaches. We all have coaches too. So you need that interaction and somebody that's going to whip you into shape 100%.
Yeah. So, and then Bob, I mean, we're gonna, just in the spirit of time that we have left here on the podcast, I usually end the podcast with a question, but I really would love, because we have, again, we're mainly residential brokers in the phone community, that I really would love for you to explain how you chose your listing agent, because a lot of us in the phone are looking for sellers as well. And right, that you had talked about a story that you had a good friend that you went with at first for your apartment in the city, right? If I'm not mistaken. And then he, for whatever reason, couldn't get the price. Can you explain how you got to Serhant and what was part of your selection process in that moment?
Sure. Well, you know, I had my apartment on the market for quite a while, for about a year. Had a lot more traffic than we anticipated. I figured we would get, you know, one or two folks a month looking at it. We had almost one a week. So much more traffic than we had anticipated, but didn't get any offers. So given the broker that I had hired was a friend of mine, and she did a very good job, but just couldn't get a bid. So I needed to make a change, and interviewed three more brokers. I included Ryan because of his reputation. Um, and three very capable brokers. I know the owners of all the residential firms, so I spoke to them and they recommended somebody. So I met with three really top people. I think I could have gone with any of the three of them and would not have made a mistake. But Ryan made several impressions on me that were very impactful. One, I guess I was under the misimpression. I said, "Oh, this is a TV guy. He's got millions of followers. This is going to be all smoke and mirrors and no substance." I found him to be extraordinarily knowledgeable, down to earth, smart. I mean, he knew the market, knew his business really well, convinced me that he knew the building really well. He had another listing in the building that he had just put under contract. And for a number of reasons, I thought it would be beneficial to go with him. And hiring him, actually, he exceeded my expectations. He was on top of things very significantly. He worked with another senior agent, Kayla Lee, in the office. And I expected to see Kayla all the time and not see Ryan. Well, that was not the case. Ryan was there a lot. So he is a guy who impressed me immediately with his market knowledge, his knowledge of the business, knowledge of the building, and exceeded my expectations. And I was expecting that folks were going to tell me I had to drop the price. And to my surprise, he said, "No, you don't have to drop the price. You just haven't found the right buyer yet." He suggested some staging things that were a little bit costly, but actually made a big difference. And within 28 days, he had the property under hard contract at my price. So couldn't be happier with the job that he and Kayla did.
That's
Wow.
awesome. That's so cool. And so, my last question here, Bob, would be mainly around if you had a time machine, and let's just say you had to go back to yourself in your 20s, knowing everything that you know now, through the business the brokers that you sold, through your everything that you've accomplished in your life. What are you telling your 20-year-old self now that you wish you knew back then?
No, just keep at it. Keep at it. I mean, I've always had, I think I've always had a very high energy level. God has blessed me with a lot of energy. I'm 62 now and still, putting in a 14, 18-hour day is not hard for me. So I've been lucky that way. But I think from a business perspective, I think just really becoming a market expert sooner. I was a generalist. When I started my career, I was a generalist, and up until very recently, I've been a generalist selling all types of properties. And when we started Massey Knakal, everything was geographically oriented. Publicly available information was not so great. So knowing a neighborhood that had a very diverse property mix in it was more important to know the neighborhood than to know the specific property type. Today, I think the property type is much more important. And that gets into a whole other conversation about, knowledge and time being a broker's two most valuable assets, and you have to use time effectively and efficiently. But I think to go back and say, hey, be an expert in one particular niche and do everything you can to promote that. I also would have told my younger self, hey, get on the technology front sooner than later. I had the flip phone long after people had iPhones. I didn't have a computer on my desk until 3 or 4 years after other folks had computers on their desk. I was very slow to pick up technology. So I finally got the message after 40 years, and I'm getting on the AI bandwagon before some other folks are. But I think it's pick up technology, push yourself, and just keep at it. Have the discipline to keep going, and realize when you've pounded that rock for the 99th time and the rock is still in one piece, don't give up. Hit it the 100th time, because that rock is going to split in half for you.
Amazing. And, that's a great way to put it. And what would you say your legacy is? Like, what do you think? What do you want people to remember you as? Like, when you're no longer here, what would you want to be like? Bob was really like a what? Good guy.
No, Richard, I appreciate that. And I will tell you the thing that I'm most proud of in my career, it's not the 2,339 buildings I've sold, the 22 billion we sold, or selling the business in Mastinackel for 100 million, or the fact that for 14 years in a row, we sold 3x the number of properties as the number two firm. It really is the extent to which I think I've had a small part in changing the lives of people around me. I think my proudest accomplishment, I would say, is that Paul Massey and I implemented a true servant leadership management style at our firm. Every owner of every company says that they do servant leadership, but most talk the talk, but don't walk the walk. We really implemented servant leadership. We wanted all of our people to do better than we did. We invested heavily in them in training. We invested in building their self-esteem, making them believe that they could do better than their best. And we built some of the best agents in New York City. And my proudest accomplishment is that today in the New York City investment sales world, there are 30 companies or divisions of companies that are either owned by or run by people that learn the business at Massey Knakal. And so to the extent that those folks say that I had even a small part in changing their lives and making their lives better, that's something that if that's my legacy, I'll take that any day of the week.
Unbelievable. What a fantastic answer. Dude, this has been like beyond the expectation that I thought was going to happen. Bob, thank you so much for your time. Very, very awesome podcast. And we wish you all the best with this new endeavor with the Map Room, BKREA, and everything you're going to be doing. Thank you so much for joining us.
You got it. Dean, Richard, you guys are awesome. Thanks so much. And it was a pleasure being with you today. I hope the folks listening got something out of it. And, if you have any questions for me, feel free to email me anytime at bk@bkrea.com, and look forward to interacting with you.
Absolutely. Any referrals, guy, reach out to Bob.